And welcome to another episode of this thing that I've inexplicably decided to call Talky Time, even though I talk about some pretty heavier things on this little series of sorts that I do. I don't know why I did this to myself, but oh well. So, before we begin, this is part of a series of basically informal, unscripted little discussions about various aspects of, philosophy, sociology, psychology, blah, 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 academic nonsense. So, today, we will be looking at, and this is basically the last in my little mini-series about postcolonialism, and today we will be looking at Achille Mbembe's work, which, let me immediately start this by saying, I don't know why, but I struggled quite a bit with his work. I think because in my studies I have recently been looking at a lot of other kind of post-colonial stuff and a lot of ecofeminist work, a lot of which tends to be written in such a way that it is not actually extremely academic, and it's more, I would say in many ways easier for a regular person to read, a person who doesn't read all this academic stuff, because it can be quite complex and difficult to read this stuff, and I think I've just been in a different mode. So when I started reading Mbembe's work, immediately I was like, oh wow, okay, this is proper dense academia. So yeah, I'm probably not the expert on this particular thing, but I decided ahead of time that I'm looking at basically three major post-colonial thinkers. The first that we looked at was Frantz Fanon, and then Albert Memmi, and now, or the other way around, I already have forgotten, but this is the last one that I'm going to be looking at for a while before moving on to ecofeminism, which will be quite a lengthy series. So, yes. Now today, looking at his work, we are going to be looking at 4 of his works, all of which are books. They're generally actually, in many ways, collections of essays, but that have some kind of a unity, not necessarily a distinct unity in that they are essay collections, but still, ultimately they are all on the overarching topic of postcolonialism in general, with a lot of focus on, okay, you might hear the dog in the background, because of course she will make a noise, because of course she will. So, with this post-colonial stuff, yeah, it is all focused around that, and it tends to discuss various writers, such as the ones that I've already looked at, like Frantz Fanon is a strong influence on him. Marcus Garvey, who I haven't read, but obviously is a major thinker in. I actually don't know if his work is post-colonial. I assume it is. I haven't looked in closely enough to be able to definitively make that kind of label. But yes. Now, we are going to be looking at 4 of his works. So, we'll be looking at first On the Postcolony, and then moving on to The Critique of Black Reason, and then on to Necropolitics, which is probably where I took the majority of my interest. And then lastly, Out of the Dark Night, which is like a newer one from last year. So it's very, very new in comparison to some of the others, which are a bit older. But yes, he is a contemporary, unlike people like Frantz Fanon, who died back in the 60s, I think. Memmi is, I believe, still alive, but very, very old. And if he is, he could be dead, but he would have died recently, because yes, he was also writing in pretty much the 50s. So this is the only really like contemporary writer in the post-colonial tradition that I am looking at for my studies. As post-colonialism is not my main area, but it is an area that overlaps with some of what I am doing. So I decided, that would be a good idea to look at it. Anyway, so let's just get started. And yes, immediately, as I said, I am not that great at this. His work is a bit dense and was a bit difficult for me, but I think a general overview would be alright. from my perspective. But of course, if you want to learn more about his work, there are people who are much, much better at this than me, and people who know his work much, much better. Also, of course, you could just read his work yourself, or look at the many, many speeches and lectures that he's given that are available on YouTube, etc. So, let's look at the first one on the post-colony. Now, as I said, all basically collections of essays, so there isn't a particular unity necessarily throughout them, as they are, the chapters do not necessarily follow from one another in a specific chronological order, but we are going to still look at them in somewhat of a chronological order, although I will not probably give specific mention to like specific chapters, etc., but more an overall general kind of concept. Now, first off, a lot of his work is essentially critical of a lot of the kinds of things that have become more norms. So he criticizes things like your standard Foucauldian thinking, sort of Gramscian and neo-Gramscian stuff, post-structuralist and a lot of Marxist things, because they tend to focus, he sees, on many of the wrong things. And then also, they tend to be quite Eurocentric. So he is more so looking at saying, listen, let's actually look at the post-colony as it is, its material conditions, and not so much through these special lenses that we like to use. And actually, when we come to necropolitics, Foucault will come up again because of his concept of biopolitics, of which Mbembe basically created his rebuttal, which is Necropolitics. And that book looks at that in more specific. And as I said, that's the one that I have more interest in because I did read Foucault for my studies, and so it is quite important to see this kind of extension of it from my perspective. So, first off, what is the post-colony? Let's just say. So, of course, the colony it's a colony back during colonial era, etc. The kind of things that you would expect. We all should know what a colony is. If you don't know what colonization is, you should probably look that up because this is assuming a baseline understanding of what colonization is. So, the post-colony is now, once independence has been achieved by these previously colonized states, what have they then decided to essentially do with this? So, when it came to the original times, the beginnings of all these kind of colonial powers that came in, they had to use violence to maintain control. They had to use founding violence, which is eventually basically coming in and taking over, right? That's like the beginning, all right? You have to stop anyone from trying to undermine the founding of your colony. Then you have legitimating violence, which is basically creating a new authority in the land, and then maintenance violence, which is basically maintaining, spreading, and creating this colonial permanent state, in which violence is a necessary component of the colony, because without violence, you would not be able to get the people to, be under you. So, in themselves, colonies must be violent. And so, because of the colony, it had to create the colonized versus the colonizer, which we've looked at in things like Albert Memmi's work. So, the colonized subject, the human being that was basically created by the colony. Because, of course, human beings exist as they are, right? But they are then created, in a sense, through whatever it is that a certain group thinks of you, right? You have to create your own version of how to look at specific people because, especially if you want to justify violence against them, well, you have to figure out how to justify that violence. So simple, the colonized individual, the native person, has to be created. Because we can't just say, oh, they're a human. No. That if they're a human, then you can't treat them the way colonies treated them. So that to create a new idea of what a colonized person was. They're not a person, right? They're not a full person. They're not like a white person. They are a special class that is more natural. They are more unrestrained. Basically, they are more of an animal. And you'll actually see this happens a lot in some of Mbembe's work, where he brings up this idea of animality, right? That the colonized subject was compared to animals, and because of the animals, or because of comparing them to animals, you have to then treat them like an animal, right? You have to beat them into submission rather than, which obviously you shouldn't beat an animal, but that is the way that it was viewed, right? So that is what he then looks at, and he says, and this comes up again and again, which is also why, because a lot of my work is in animal studies. So this essentially comparing human beings to animals as a way to make them inferior, to classify them as inferior, and if you can do that, then you can do whatever you want to them. That's the idea. If a human being is no longer a human being, if you turn them into an animal, then you can justify things like murder. Because, well, it's not even a full person, right? So who cares? That is the idea. That's what they essentially do. Now, the post-colonial system, as it is now, so the post-colony, right? Colonization ended in violence. It started in violence, it maintained itself in violence, and it ended in violence. The wars for independence were bloody, like violent attacks. The native people wanted their freedom, and they were willing to fight for it. And they were willing to die for it. And then eventually they did get their freedom. However, as you'll see a lot of the time, colonies were screwed completely. So previously colonized countries completely screwed because, yes, the colonizing country eventually pulled out and they were like, okay, cool, you have your independence, you're free. By the way, all the stuff that's in the country belongs to us, so you have to pay us constantly. And you get this idea of this sort of entanglement where private businesses and public governments from other countries and within the country itself are not actually helping you. So you get things like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, which are essentially forcing certain ways of being onto the post-colony. Now, you get basically racist people who will say, oh no, well, look at Africa, how terrible it is. It must be because they're inferior or whatever, or they don't have Western values, when actually it was Western values that made them that way. Western values were like, I don't know, you have to be capitalist. If you try anything else, we won't help you. And yes, I know that we caused the problems in the first place, but it reminds me of a joke. There was a joke, which is a very poignant joke. It's about America, but you can apply the same logic to the colony. So there is a swear word in this joke. So basically, okay. And this was a joke by a South African comedian. And he was talking about the election of Barack Obama. And this was basically right after Obama got elected. All right, and he says, you play with a country till it's fucked, and then throw it to a black guy. Look, they break everything. That is basically what they did. They were like, no, we're going to completely exploit this country. We're going to kill the people. We're going to do terrible things to the people, to the land, to everything there. Oh, but no, it's fine. You have it. And then as soon as they throw it to basically the colonized people, the black people, they go, look, they're terrible. They obviously can't do this themselves. Also, you owe us money because, you know, yes, we owned your mines, but we still own the equipment, so you have to keep paying us. So essentially, it's this idea of continually pushing the post-colonial state down and making sure that it remains poor and weak. So that is very fun. It's great. So now, the post-colony now as essentially a thing that is its own state now. It exists, and it is directly connected with a lot of Western spheres of influence, essentially. And actually now there is the more pressing influence of countries like China on Africa, which you can also understand why African countries will go to China, because China is probably going to be more sympathetic to them than, you know, America or the International Monetary Fund. So, of course, they are going to turn towards people who in the past have not been their enemy. As has been pointed out before, I believe Fanon basically said this, that, listen, African people, the people who are fighting for their freedom at the time, they do not necessarily care about this Cold War thing. They don't care about communism or capitalism. They want their own thing. However, the only country that has actually cared about the interests, or at least not necessarily cared, but essentially materially helped the fight against colonization was the USSR. It wasn't America. America wanted to cripple these anti-colonial efforts because a lot of these people only got help from the communists. So the West isn't an ally. And the communists have always actually been more helpful to the previously colonized countries than the West ever was. So, of course, that is what they would do. So, he then looks at how now, right, there's power within the post-colony, these new people who are in power. However, they tend to be horrible people, often because, like America puts them there. But there'll be these awful dictators and stuff in power. And so, what they do is they then essentially do a lot of grotesque power. They don't have the same power as like America or something. So they exert power onto their subjects in a more grotesque way. For instance, there's a part where Mbembe talks about the way that like some people were just arbitrarily punished by ridiculous like things, like disgusting things. Like they were forced to strip, or they had, feces on them or smeared onto them and stuff like that. Basically disgusting acts of power. So power is still inherent in the leaders of these post-colonial countries, and they are not necessarily there to care. They don't actually care about their own people. They are pretty much in bed with the West, and they're like, okay, cool, well, it's fine. So, yeah. Now, when he talks about the actual colony, the people, and how not how we, but how the colonial state basically saw certain people. Now, this is what happens, all right? And this is a quote, page 180, and it's from chapter 5, which is called Out of This World. Here's the quote. And this is basically him saying how the colonizers saw the colonized people. In fact, he/she has no needs. Remember, this is talking about how they see black people, basically. He/she has no debts to worry about. This is why the Negro prefers to be lazy and poor rather than work and be paid. He/she is naturally indolent, does not like work, and is totally uninterested in saving. In such an atmosphere of general laziness, violence towards the Negro's person and property is in no way morally reprehensible. For savage peoples have no law, thus they cannot expect respect for their property or their independence. The Negro, in particular, is untrustworthy, irresponsible, and a liar. He/she breaks his or her word as easily as he/she gives it. His/her life is total idleness, existence bleak. To force this Negro to learn to be free, what better than to make him or her work? Now, if you know anything about colonization, you might have heard this expression, which is the white man's burden. This was a concept that white people had to come into Africa, these terribly savage places, and it's the burden of the white man. He must come in, and he must save these godless black people from themselves. Because if they are not helped by us, then who will help them? Now that's basically the way that, they are seen. And furthermore, he also adds this, and this is in his conclusion, page 236. As an animal, the native is supposed to belong to the family of eminently mechanical, almost physical things, without language, even though endowed with sense, organs, veins, muscles, nerves, and arteries, through which nature, in its virginal power, manifests itself. Placed the margins of the human, the native with the animal, belongs to the register of imperfection, error, deviation, approximation, corruption, and monstrosity. Not having attained the age of maturity, natives and animals cannot stand on their own 2 feet. This is why they are put firmly in the grasp of another. So, basically, the colonized people, they're basically just animals, and animals can't look after themselves. No, if you left them in nature, they would die. So, we have to, as our burden, the white man's burden, we must help them. So, of course, you can see this is just disgusting racism. That's it. That's all it is. It's racism. All right, that is what this is. That is what the way that colonization saw black people, and furthermore, people now see previously colonized people. They'll be like, oh no, you'll still hear these kind of words. Oh no, black people are just less intelligent. They're less worthy of whatever it is. The idea that they are not, special. They are not human. They are, whatever. So let's move on to the second book, which is the Critique of Black Reason. Now, basically, he talks about, there's this idea, right, of reason. It's the thing that separates man from the animal. But we're European. No, black people do not have reason. Rationality, no, that is what the white man has. And this idea that, no. Black people don't have reason, don't have rationality. They're not really human, they're something else. And now he critiques this idea that there is basically no black reason. And also, the concept of reason is inherently problematic. If you look at animal studies at all, it's just not great, And he even talks about Hegel. And Hegel was very racist. And Hegel pretty much said that, listen, I'm not going to talk about black people because they're not even people. When I talk about rationality and philosophy and all these amazing things that we European white people have done, I can't talk about black people because obviously they can't do any of these kind of things. They hardly have language. Of course, he said this in German, as he was German. But yes, it's just this idea. And Mbembe basically comes out and says, listen, race is not genetic. It's not like a special genetic, physical, or anthropological fact. It is a myth. It is a dualism. It is white people are superior, black people are inferior. This is a myth. It is made up by people who want to then ground it in logic. You'll see this a lot of the time with discussions about nonsense ideas like IQ, right? They'll look at, there's a fantastic video by YouTuber Sean, anyway, you can just type in Sean or the bell curve, and he discusses the book The Bell Curve, which is pretty much about that. It's about this idea that, because in the bell curve, it's all about IQ and how IQ is real, even though it isn't real. And that these people looked at basically studies that were done in places like Africa and stuff, and that on average, black people have lower IQ than white people, which then they say must be because, essentially, I'm not racist, of course, but as you can see from the data, black people are inferior to the whites. That is pretty much what they said. That is what they were trying to say. And that is absolute nonsense. The reason for things like lower IQ in certain groups is actually because of socio-political issues and socio-cultural issues. It's a very, very deep thing. Maybe one day I should actually do a discussion about IQ and intelligence in general, what intelligence is, but not now. So, and for now, just look at Sean's video. It's very long, but it's absolutely fantastic and goes into all the nonsense ideas. So, he talks about how this idea, right, where they said, okay, yes, race is a special category which was made up, that then is certain races are superior to other races, and that black people, or that it's just black people. You go to Europe, and it's not just Europe, it's none of this. There's English people, there's German people, there's what, no, but in Africa, there's black people. They're all the same. Who cares about their differences in cultures? I mean, it's not even real culture. That's the way that they view it, or viewed it. Well, nowadays, the people who did view it that way are all dead now. But their ancestors, not their ancestors, their descendants, that's the word. Their descendants still view it that way, but they're alive, I suppose. So he pretty much talks about here how, listen, this is all like made up, right? And it's a fantasy. It's a legal category in a lot of the times, because that's the thing. So you look at like apartheid South Africa, it became legal categories. They were white, black, colored, Chinese. Actually, don't know what China. I think there might have been. Yeah, but then you got honorary whites as well. That was a thing. I think the Japanese were classified as honorary whites in the apartheid system. But these are they're classifications, right? These are legal classifications. But then you get things like in South Africa, so in places like America, the term coloured is seen as a derogatory word. In South Africa, it's a legal category to this day. But a Cape coloured person and a Cape Malay person and a mixed race person will all be classified as coloured, but they're not the same. They are different cultures. A mixed race person, for instance, someone who is, say, white and a black, like a white mother, black father, or whatever, they are not part of the same culture as the Cape Coloured or Cape Malay populations. But we have the legal category of coloured. And they ask for these, like, what difference does it actually make as a person? It doesn't. These are just things we've made up to try to classify people according to some special hierarchical relationship, that some are superior to others and others are below other, blah, blah, blah. Rubbish. And essentially that's what he's talking about here. He's saying, listen, this is all nonsense. It's all made up. And you made up these other categories. You created slavery. You created racial groups. And then you said certain ones were less. And he talks about, say, Fanon here, and how he looked at the concept of the colonial gaze. So the representation of certain people as being, so white people looking at black people and then seeing them as less, as more animalistic. And this then, not because of any facts, but because of the way people perceive others, we then created legal facts. So we now believe that there are actual differences between races, even though there isn't. Like, race is kind of a nonsense concept, whereas something more like cultures are distinct from each other. But we don't talk about cultures, we talk about races, right? And these kind of categorizations are used as justification for a lot of discrimination in general. Now, a lot of this book I did struggle with. I don't know why I struggled so much with it, but anyway. However, now let's just move on to the next book, which is the one that probably I had the best time with, because of my thing. I'm not really going to be speaking about a lot of it, because also I did still struggle with it, because I don't know why, but I just did. So I'm actually just going to basically talk about the concept of necropolitics itself. Now, first of all, let me just say this quote. Now, this is on page 38 of Necropolitics. To a large extent, racism is the driver of the necropolitical principle insofar as it stands for organizing destruction for a sacrificial economy, the functioning of which requires on the one hand a generalized cheapening of the price of life, and on the other a habituation to loss. Now, let's unpack this. Now, first off, you can't really understand necropolitics until you understand biopolitics. Now, biopolitics is a Foucauldian term. So this is Foucault. And now Foucault, when talking about biopolitics, is essentially, and biopower specifically, is the ability to control bodies, to physically control the life of people. Because if you look back at sovereign times, right, when there was a king, he could decide to kill people at a whim. Modern liberal democracies and what have you don't have this. They're like, no, we don't have this, right? It's inefficient. What we want to do is not be able to control death, but be able to control life. So we want to be able to control people's bodies. And you can do this through various ways. But let's say, there are regulative biopower. So people cannot do certain things. You cannot go into that place, right? Keep off the lawn. Keep off the grass. They are controlling your body and stopping you from going there. Now, that's a little simple one, but look at, say, government buildings. There'll be a sign that says, you may not enter here. Authorized personnel only. They are saying that your body, your physical body, cannot go there. You are not allowed to go there, which is a form of control. So that is what you can't do. But then it also does what you can do, which is more disciplinary. right? They're going to train you to do certain things. So they put you in schools, which then train you to be on time, to obey authority, and to do whatever you're told. You're trained to do these things. When a teacher says get up, you get up. And that is training you for then later in life, when a cop tells you get up, you get up. When your boss tells you get up, you get up. They are teaching you that your body is not yours. Your body belongs to the state and the economy. It is not yours. So that is biopolitics in very, very brief general terms. Now, necropolitics is saying that basically Mbembe said Foucault only had half the thing here. He was only looking at, because now he said, oh no, with sovereigns there was like death politics, but not anymore. But there is. Death is still controlled. We still control death. Not me, not like us, but, governments. And he looked at, say, things like democracy. You'd say, oh, yeah, no, democracy is so much better than it used to be. Yeah, I suppose it is better than it used to be. But not really. Like now, we still have colonial occupation, or post-colonial, or also neo-colonial occupation, of countries, where people still get killed for things. There's still war, right? There's still the use of technology to essentially control people and to choose who gets to die. Case study is, say, America as it is now. Black people are allowed to be killed by cops. There's now a reckoning with that, and a lot of people are obviously very against that. That's literally what Black Lives Matter is. But cops can often get away with murdering an innocent black person. They're allowed to. And it's part of the control. If you can control death, you can control life. If a black person is afraid of being murdered by a cop for, reaching for their driver's license. You're reaching for your driver's license, and the cop goes, oh, you have a gun, and shoots you. And then afterwards goes, oh, he didn't have a gun, he was reaching for his driver's license, and I thought it was a gun, so I shot him. Now this then sends a message to certain people and says, the cops can kill you if you don't obey. So, obey. We will separate you. We will make sure that you are controlled, because we can control your death. We can control your life by our politics, and we can control your death. And ultimately they can. Like, a cop could still kill you. Like, regardless of whether you're white or black, it's just more likely that a black person will get shot by a cop. But a cop could still kill you. Great example is in my lovely, lovely country of South Africa, there was it's pretty much considered the worst massacre since apartheid. I think it was 2012. The Marikana massacre. A bunch of miners were protesting. The cops came in and opened fire with live ammunition. They started killing people, sending a very, very direct message. Now, South Africa is a liberal democracy with one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. Those cops still killed all those people, and this is the thing that made Marikana such a intense thing, was that, so they opened fire, the miners started running, because of course, the cops are shooting at you, run! The cops then started pursuing, not to arrest, but to kill. A lot of those people were shot in the back. People were shot from strange angles. I think there was one person the person was cowering under some rocks, and someone climbed up and shot them from above. That isn't a person who's a threat. That's a person who's afraid. And you can tell, this was also a big thing in South Africa, I think it was 1969, the Sharpeville massacre. Cops start opening fire. People start running away. Most of the people who were killed were shot in the back. So, it isn't just about controlling life, is it? It's about controlling death. They can kill you. And those people at Marikana, they didn't face repercussions for that. They didn't face repercussions. So, that is pretty much necropolitics. This idea that, no, listen, they will control your life through your death. they can do it. So that's great. Now let's look at the last book, which I also struggled with. I struggle with everything apparently. I'm not clever. People seem to think I'm clever. I don't know why. I read books. It doesn't make you clever just because you can read some things. And a lot of the time, I will struggle with understanding something and then have to look up videos explaining it because I struggled. And you know what? That is the way that people should just acknowledge that. People should say, yes, listen, I'm not smart enough, so I looked things up. Now, I didn't look up this one. I don't know why. I looked up Necropolitics stuff, but not about this book. I assumed because it's new there wouldn't really be anything about it, so I just didn't. In a lot of the sense, this is sort of repeating the same kind of points, talking about the post-colony, how everything is now about profitability, right? The post-colony has to be part of the current system. Now, think about the way it was. So colonization happens. The people have their land exploited and their people exploited. People are killed, people are controlled. Then, the colonizers leave. But they then say, listen, this cost us a lot of money, so you have to pay us back. And those things you now have, you have to pay us back for those. And if you don't, we'll do sanctions against you. So, the post-colony has to be forced to do that. So they're then forced into doing things like the labor of the first world. They are the outsourcing people. The poors who will do it for cheaper. We maintain colonial control, but in a new, nicer way. Then we pay you wages. Much lower than we pay, people in first world countries. But, yeah. That's good. Like, I remember this. This was a thing. To me, it's recent. This video, I record these in advance, far in advance. Now, I saw this thing, and it was for, I'm not going to name names, but it was a writing job, and they said you'll get $20 per article. Now, this is just a news article. It's easy to write. People in the comments are talking about how they're exploiting writers, etc., etc. I'm sitting here going, $20 for an article I can do in like less than an hour? Oh, sign me on! That is so much money for me, because I live in South Africa. We get paid next to nothing in comparison to other places. I've spoken to other people that their salaries dwarf mine. In like America, you get people who will go on about how however many tens of thousands a year is like cheap. If I made $10,000 a year, I would be quite happy. But that is because I'm from a place where it's much, much poorer. And we are cheaper, so we get paid less. That is the way it goes. You pay people in the first world countries much better than you pay people who you outsource to. Which is obviously a huge problem. And he's talking about, now he doesn't speak about this specifically, what I was just whinging about, but he is basically talking about how it's all about profitability and in service to the previous masters, essentially. It never went away. Now, a lot of the other ones he talks about, like France and how France hasn't really embraced any of this kind of stuff and a couple of extra things, but I didn't read them too deeply because it's just not the area that I'm going to be particularly looking at. So I think that's pretty much where I'm going to end it for now. Because, I think I've extended what I can offer about this. So I think that will be it then for now. So I hope that you have, if you like this, please do the like, share, subscribe, whatever things. If you didn't enjoy it, sorry. That's all I can really offer. An apology. But if you did like it, you can also look in the description. You'll see all my other stuff, Twitter, blah, 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 blah. The other stuff that I do. And yes, I think that's about it. So I hope that you all have a great day, week, month ahead. And yes, I will see you next time. Next time, we'll be starting a bit of a series about ecofeminism, where we're looking at a lot of ecofeminists in a row. So, yeah. Bye-bye.